Today I'm speaking with Esther Goetz and Sarah Meassick. Esther and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. We've been trying to get our schedules aligned, and Esther is the co-host for the Deconstructing Mamas podcast. She's a freelance writer, a speaker, and spiritual director. She unpacks her ever-evolving faith journey on social media as Esther the Dalai Mama. And Sarah is a mother and a public school teacher, and she also lives in PA there with Esther. Not with her. You all don't live in the same house, right?
No, no, no.
But pretty close
But
by.
we are mother and daughter too.
Yep.
Yes.
And their mother and daughter. And also, just to give a brief disclaimer, they're both still theists. So I just wanted to say that right up front. So anyone that doesn't want to see my videos where I interview people who are still Christians, feel free to pass on this one. But I think it'll be worth it. They have some great things to share. So Esther, let's start with you. Besides what I mentioned about your Deconstructing Mamas podcast and all that, what else can we know about you?
So I was a missionary kid. I grew up in war-torn Ethiopia until my family fled the country when I was in junior high. I currently live in New Jersey with my husband. I have four, I call them grownish and flownish kids, and have a bunch of significant others. We have Sarah here with me, has a little boy, so I have one grandson. And
Nice.
something really quirky, two quirky things about me are that I love crime shows, like any crime show, or I should say first responder shows. Like I love first responder shows. I could watch them ad nauseum. I don't know why that's the case, but I do love that. And then I also, my favorite thing in the whole world to eat is Lay's potato chips with a big glass of milk, preferably when I'm watching crime shows. So that is my favorite thing. What I also love is I have come to absolutely be giddy about flowers and the outdoors. And so I live on a garden property where we have perennial gardens, and I spend quite a bit of time outside with those. So yeah, but I mean, we'll go through that in my deconstructing journey, is that nature has become almost, I mean, it has encompassed all of who God is to me, lots of who God is.
Hmm. Thank you so much.
So
But
yeah.
just quick question: Do you when you eat your potato chips with the milk, are you dipping them or just like one and then the
No,
other?
no, it's a trick. So I put the potato chips in my mouth and I drink a glass of milk like this. And the reality there is, and people are like, that's so gross. I'm like, do you ever have sour cream or dip with your potato chips? That gives like the dairy salty thing. So I have to kind of put a potato chip in and then take it. It's crazy.
I've seen people do French fries in a frosty. Have you seen that before?
Oh, yeah,
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 that's
yeah.
Kind of
That's
cool.
similar.
similar.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like dairy salty. Do you have ice cream with like pretzels in it? And
Yeah.
so
Good
that
stuff.
makes me sound more legit. But I've been doing this since I was like, I don't know, a kid. And I look forward to it. Like I literally this morning, I brought a bag, I'm visiting Sarah, and I brought a bag of potato chips with me. And then this morning I found like a whole milk so that if I get snacky later, like this is what I do. So
Nice.
sorry.
Nice. And Sarah, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey with my family. Then I went to college in Pennsylvania, stayed out here. I teach second grade. I've been teaching second grade. This will be my 10th year of teaching. I'm kind of passionate about teaching children that they're also a teacher of me and that I'm a learner as well in the classroom. My district likes to say that you're the lead learner in the classroom, and I've just kind of grabbed that. I also
Nice.
like to garden. I have a big vegetable garden. On Sundays, I put my mini farm stand down and get rid of my extra produce to the community. Um, a quirky fact about me is I can make balloon animals. So sometimes I go to birthday parties and make balloon animals for my son's friends. I do it in my classroom too. I have a lot of other quirky things, but
Mm, that's
um,
awesome.
yeah.
And how close do you all live to each other?
We're about like 2 hours away, so we visit fairly often. We solve
Good.
the world's problems in my 7-minute commute each morning and my 7-minute commute home when I give her a phone call. So we have 14 minutes to solve world's problems every day.
And we do a good job.
Yep.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I need to get. I'm my family's in not too far from Lancaster, and I need to get up there and visit more often.
Yeah.
Well, Esther, we'll start with you. I know we're going to go back and forth here and tag team a little bit, but we'd love to kind of just hear. I like to just have people start with what they were taught growing up, just kind of
Mm.
where did this whole thing start? What were the things you believed, and obviously how did it change over time?
Yeah, so I said I was a missionary kid, and I'm also the grandchild of a missionary. So baked into our bones was the evangelical model, right? You're sin from the time you were born, and well, probably in utero, I don't know, but you're born with original sin. Jesus is the sacrifice for that sin. He's God's son. All those I'm sure your audience knows that typical evangelical. My mom grew up as a fundamentalist. And so I would not say I was very much a fundamentalist. I would say much more evangelical. Like everything was about keeping people out of hell. So we learned that as little kids. My parents' entire job was related to that. Our mission was that. We were part of that mission. We were told that that was the highest calling that you could ever do, was be in a family of people who were keeping people out of hell. That was how you loved people best. When I was in junior high, I was told that I had the gift of evangelism, which I think now is just that I have the gift of having like lots of agendas for people. So, and so this was a holy agenda. I do have the gift of judgment and discernment, or whatever you want to say, like the funny Christian words. But I was just given that as a passion, right? Allowed to have an agenda for people and allowed to have a holy agenda that was disguised in the name of love. And so I did that very well. I helped to convert like 40 or 50 people in my public high school. We had a huge club of us that we all pretty much just like dated each other and kissed each other. I mean, in the end of the day, I think it was just a way for people to feel like they belonged to something. But a lot of those people became missionaries, which is kind of crazy. They came from very broken situations or whatever. And it's terrible now. Like I look back at that and think like how much harm I brought to those people, thinking that it was good. So that carried on into college and in my early parenting. I remember saying to my husband, I don't want children unless they're praisers of God. The more praisers of God I can bring into this world, the better. The more people to bring glory to God, the better. So in Sarah's early childhood, probably until middle school and even through, high school, I don't know when it all started to change. I just felt very strongly about that the most important thing was keeping her and her siblings out of hell. Until I would say I saw that the harm that was I found out that loving my kids, I loved my children more than I actually loved my theology. The harm that it was bringing, especially to my two oldest. Sarah will tell her story on that. A lot of anxiety, a lot of just what I would have labeled rebellion, which is so terrible. I think he just was anxious as well. And he just had ADHD and couldn't really do it. Sarah could do it, and he couldn't do it. And so I realized how much harm was coming to them. And the love that I had for my kids overwhelmed and I would say now the fear I had over the theology that I believed. And I believed that love needs to trump fear. And then that was kind of the beginning of the unpacking of a long I would say it's been 15, even 20 years now, a long, slow journey to where I am today.
So as you're raising your kids, with this fear of hell, did you get any sense that there was like a stress that was being added to you or to them of like what if what if they don't, like, just the fact of like that there's an implication of like if some of them, or maybe one of them doesn't make it, either because they just don't believe, or from a Calvinist perspective they're not elect, if they don't make it, that you're literally going to be spending, half of your family is going to be in heaven and the other half's in hell. How did you respond to all that as you were truly believing it?
So it was the only thing in my mind all the time. I mean, was how are these people going to be Christians? How are they going to not go to eternal conscious torment? And so it definitely played out in my parenting. How could it not? And I would say the best way that it played out was controlling everything, controlling the narrative, controlling what they watched, what they listened to, who they spent time with, trying to control it as much as I possibly could. But you do have that niggling fear that it isn't ultimately in your control, because you know that's the other crazy thing. You have the Calvinist perspective on one hand. And believe it or not, when I was 12, I worked that all out in my mind, whether or not once saved, always saved, whether or not there was election. And I would try to go down like it's the two paths of election and responsibility, like double train tracks. I did that all. And so being much more of an evangelical than a fundamentalist, I definitely just felt like, well, my job, I have to do my job. And that is to try to keep them out. But I mean, it played out like,
I mean, I can jump in to share a story, like how much, like I was born just 10 months after my parents were married. So I'm very much walking this like journey, and it's impacting like your really small child brain to the point where I'm pinning my brother down in the backseat of the car and saying, say the prayer. And then he said the prayer. And then I'm like, write it down, Mom. We need to know that on this date, he is going, like, we know for sure he's going to heaven.
right.
So,
Wow.
I mean, that's what it looks
Right.
like. I got my like youngest brother saved in the backseat of our car.
You were 8 and he was 4.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
it's,
and I'm sure that plays out in families all across. I mean, of course it does. How could it not?
I mean, I still see it with very conservative evangelical friends where they're posting on Facebook like, thank God I no longer have to worry. So and so child is saved. This, praise God. Like, this is a moment to celebrate. And it's just really what I see coming through the screen now is like, my fears are relieved and I can be at peace now. But
right, because they said, and I view it as like a magic incantation.
yeah,
Seriously, we can control the God of the universe with a magic incantation. And I think it's just OCD, right? It's religious scrupulosity where you're convincing yourself that, oh, they said the prayer. And so now I can be okay inside.
I'm relieved.
I'm relieved. They said the prayer. So now I'm off the hook. And of course, I held to the once saved, always saved, because that's what I came to the conclusion of when I was 12. So as long as I could manipulate my children when they were 3, 4, 5, and 6 and say the magic prayer, then I'm okay. And I did get all my kids to say the magic prayer, which is so ridiculous.
So we're all good.
So we were fine. But that now I see is just, you can emotionally manipulate children to do anything that you want them to do, either by coercion, guilt, which worked on Sarah, or fear, which worked on my other son. My other son, I just think he wanted his sister off his back because he was just saying the magic prayer to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, just like he doesn't hold to that now. I obviously none of my kids really hold to this. Probably my second born holds more to this, but I mean, it's just been very interesting how it absolutely consumes everything. They went to Awana. I mean, it was like, it was just full blown evangelical. And now you're saved. Our job now as a family is to be a light to all of our people in the neighborhood. Now that I've got you all saved, now you need to get other people saved. So I did to my kids exactly what my parents did to me, which I thought was good, right? We got a lot of people come to church, go to youth club, Now, I'm not going to say that there wasn't a good foundation there, which is what won out in the end. I did love my children and I do love them. And that's why this model did not work in the end, because love won. Like love won. It just did. It definitely won out. And that's what I fully believe. If you ask where am I today, I think that love wins. I think that love is what we're striving for. I think being a deist or a theist, I believe that love and the word God are interchangeable. Anywhere I see love, I see God. And that's kind of where I land. And if I find myself being pushed by fear, then I don't think that's healthy, good, right? And I'm talking toxic fear, right? Fear that's your master, that's controlling you. I'm not talking like, oh my gosh, don't touch the stove. I'm talking about manipulative fear that leads to controlling everything. versus letting people be like leading by love, which is you don't really have an agenda. Your agenda is that that people would become fully themselves. And that's the agenda that I have. And that's what I slowly moved to over time with my kids. I have a large, where I make my money, I would say right now is in a space called Moms of Bigs. And it's my entire mantra. We give our kids the roots of unconditional love and the wings of freedom to be completely themselves. That's the end. End of story. And so that's kind of where I moved to over time. So my younger two definitely got much more of that model of they get to be completely themselves. I mean, I think you guys got to within a framework, within a terrible framework.
Yeah, I do want to come back to some of the ways that you changed your beliefs. But before I do, I wanted just to lay the groundwork. Could you talk a little bit more about what you believed about the Bible and like just what place the Bible held in your life?
I'm just very typical. I loved the Bible. I was on a Bible quiz team in high school. I became the best quizzer in the country. It was my idol.
Nice.
Yeah, there it is. Whoop, best for my denomination, which was a pretty large denomination. We went to nationals, whatever.
Yeah, you were like the best.
I was the best.
You memorized
I memorized
chunks,
entire chunks. It was
whole books of the Bible.
Strangely enough, I thought that was the way to go. Inerrancy, all that good stuff, right? You have to do a ton of mental gymnastics. I tried. I did. Whatever. I did what I did at the time. And then, believe it or not, I had a pastor, an English professor, turned pastor. Actually, an English major at Wheaton College. He was my pastor when I was a very young mom. And he went up to the pulpit and said, my Bible was my idol. And I was like, wow, what are you talking about? How is that even possible? Like the Bible was definitely a fourth member of the Trinity, all the things that I would say now, which wouldn't be a Trinity, it would be a quadrinity. Yeah, it was just on par with God. And all of that is absolutely ridiculous to me now. That was, like I said, a long, slow journey. So that's like 20 years ago that a pastor said that. And I was like, what does he mean? I don't get that. And so it was just a long, slow unpacking again of something like that. I'm an author and I kind of fully went into that and a writer about 7 or 8 years ago, thanks to you. She encouraged me to start a blog. And I found that people read my stuff and like did whatever they wanted with it. And
had to be 10 years ago.
No, it was 2017, believe it or not, only.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So so it's crazy when you realize what people do with your words and how much they misconstrue them and how you're just an author. Like, and people will literally take my stuff and be like doing whatever with it. And I actually had a very staunch evangelical, much more fundamentalist friend of mine say to me, oh my gosh, don't you worry like about giving your stuff to people and then they just do whatever interpretation? And I was like, that's not my problem. That is not my problem. What people do with my words is not my fault. I am just responsible for my own words. And so when I saw that, it wasn't very long until you can kind of be like, oh my goodness. And the crazy thing about evangelicalism is you're supposed to bring yourself to the Bible. It's supposed to like, it means something different to everything. So again, it gets like twisted, right? But somehow you're supposed to be able to make it personal to your life, but you can't add words. It is so, I mean, I don't ever swear, but it is like a mind that goes on in your brain. I mean, it's just crazy. All of the mind games you do play to make
Very
it
true.
all this fit.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. And it doesn't actually work. And then, of course, I had another pastor crazy. I went to visit Rwanda with my husband. We went on I call it a poverty tourism trip now, whatever. Thank you, Jen Hatmaker. But we went because we have really passion for clean water, and we still do. For the planet. But I went and I learned things there that I would never have been able to learn reading a story. And I came back from it and my pastor had been there too, like the year prior. And he said, isn't it like the fifth gospel? And he goes, because, language is limited. And he goes, but, I can say that to you, but never, ever would I say that from the pulpit. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're like, this is nuts. Like, you don't even believe what you're preaching from the pulpit.
Yeah.
And so then I understand from that, I kind of was like, at the minimum, the Bible's limited because it's just language. How are you trying to, you can't, and then of course, like, then that took me on all kinds of paths, listening to the Bible for normal people. I mean, I don't know where somebody said to me, why do you love hell so much? I mean, it's just all these different pieces. And so I would say the concept of hell and the concept of the inerrancy of scripture and the fear love thing were kind of like my roots of like, and then when you go down the slippery slope,
Yeah,
it all falls apart. And
it does.
so and I think I feel like for me, it's been the water slide that leads to, I feel like I went on the slippery slope or the water slide that leads to life. And I actually then put on a scuba diving and went into the beauty of the depths of the sea. And I'm seeing all kinds of things I never saw before. All the beautiful things that you don't see when you're just looking at the surface. So that's kind of where I am now. Yeah.
Sarah, as you were watching these changes, did you observe them? Like, what was it, something where you were kind of seeing slow changes, or did your mom just suddenly kind of talk to you at some point and say, hey, just so you know, over the last 2 years I've made some changes I haven't told you about, but let's talk about them now? Like, how did that change in front of you?
Well, we would never have not talked about them
That's good.
because we just talked so frequently. But I think it was like a slow, like, unravel. I don't think it was just like 1 minute one thing and 1 minute another thing. I think she started to be like, "Why don't you read this? Why don't you like hear about this?" And then she was like, "You like this Bible for Normal People podcast? Like, listen to this." And then that's when we listened a bit of Pete Enns on there and Jared Bias. But then
you also had Dad.
Yeah, and my dad has definitely had a different journey. I mean, he grew up Catholic and went to Catholic school all the way through like high school, and then he became like pretty fundamental evangelical, which is why we landed in a very conservative church. We landed very like even more conservative than you even agreed with, but that was like my childhood lens, so I didn't really know that, and we. So then I think I started seeing it in both of them, and he went more the contemplative route. I call him like a married monk. Like, he just kind of went back to this like contemplative kind of practice, more mystical. So I saw that in both of them.
He went the Richard Rohr route.
Yeah.
And I went the like the Pete Enns and whoever wrote The Shack. Paul Young route, because Paul Young is a missionary kid and stuff. So it's so many things.
So just little books you would suggest to me. Like, she suggested these things to me, podcasts and things, and then I started to figure out, oh, this is very different. And I'm still in the process of giving myself permission to believe differently than I did. And I definitely do, but things feel weird and unknown, and even to give myself permission to be different than my parents, because that was a huge part of like that growing up. Like, you believe what everyone believes. We're in this together. Like, yeah. So like even being able to define the narrative for myself now.
So you all would fall into a category I would think of what I'd call progressive Christianity. Is that fair to say? No?
I don't cringe at that word. I'm okay with that title. Yeah.
Well, I guess what I was going to use it as a segue to ask this question. There are people like myself who are atheists who would say the Bible doesn't really have anything to do with our real life. There's a few things in there like, being kind to each other, being patient and so forth, but those are things you can come up with on your own or through other philosophers. But the Bible as an authority doesn't have anything to do with our real life. And there's of course Christians on the far opposite side that would say it has everything to do with your real life.
Yeah.
And the people in the middle, often it seems like from my experience, the Christians, when they look at people like you that are in the middle, they start saying things like, I don't know if you're actually really were a Christian in the first place. So they're kind of like trying to figure out where you land. But it sounds like you still in some ways appreciate and love Jesus. Is that fair to say?
Is that too much? For me, I love Jesus as an archetype I mean, he's my starting point. He's
Okay.
not my ending point, if that makes sense. He's what started me on this journey. That's just my background, but it's not, he's an archetype for what it means to love unconditionally, what it means to understand your humanity and your divinity. I don't love any labels at this point because that's my whole thing of being completely yourself. And I just again feel like people want to, and Sarah can have a completely different thought on this. I don't care. But for me, I guess I feel like I get nervous a lot about any kind of putting anything in a box.
Yeah.
Because I'm really big on you need to be completely yourself. So I think every single faith journey is as individual to people as people. And so progressive Christianity, do I align with some things about progressive Christianity where I am today? Absolutely inclusive of every single person, but that aligns more with what I would say to be yourself than labeling myself a progressive Christian. Like you could, I don't care if you're gay. I don't care what you are. I could care less as long as you're being yourself. Right. That's like where I am. That's why I would say Jesus is my starting point, not my ending point. I'm coming to land where Jesus is an archetype for the rest of us. Like we
we're
are
all human.
We're all human. We're all holy.
Divine,
we're all divine. He was just here to say, this is what it's like. I am the Father are one. You and the Father are one. We're all one. Everything's one. So, and I've gotten to be really big on the whole nature thing and like how we're one with everything in the created universe. I definitely am still a deist. I think that there is a force of love that created, and that's what love does. It just creates. Like part of what love does is creates, makes things bigger, makes things better. So I'm okay with that. But the force behind that has to be absolute love. And I was a big Trinitarian, and I'm still kind of like a Trinitarian in many ways because it helps me to make sense of things, but I don't really care. Like I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm not going to die on any hills at this point.
Yeah.
So that's where I get like the progressive Christian. I get like, I don't know what to say. That's why I am in process and currently going to be a spiritual director in the fall, and I'm in the process of becoming one, because the whole spiritual direction is about people being completely themselves, whatever spiritual journey that they go on.
And when you said, like, there have definitely been people who have called us out and said you're no longer a Christian. I mean, that is definitely something that like we've been confronted and tried to like reconvert like on numerous occasions by people from my past. Our past and are trying to like bring us back to the fold because we've somehow fallen.
They can't believe it.
Yeah, they're like, what? Because we were so evangelical, so
respected.
Yeah, respected for that in those spaces. I
and
think
just
I'm
to nail
okay.
it down, just now, you would not say you're a sinner who needed a savior then, is that correct?
Yeah, that feels weird to say no, but yeah.
Okay.
No.
Good inside. Well, that's me.
Okay.
I
just want to make sure I understood where you were landing, because sometimes, again, I know labels are bad, but sometimes just putting different things and saying, do you believe this? Do you believe that?
Yeah.
It sounds like you would no longer agree with the statement, the Bible is the infallible word of God.
No.
You're a sinner. You needed a savior. Jesus is the only way. God needed blood and so forth. And then everyone else who doesn't believe that's going to be punished. You don't adhere to that.
Yeah. And I think part of the unpacking for you and I, and I'll speak for my journey, but is just coming again, like is getting rid of some of the dualism too. Like this is black or white. And I think that's when I was confronted with having to make choices on these things. That's when it all also kind of fell apart for me. I was serving in a church. We were in a small group, and then we were told we needed to like fill out this document that's like expressed all our beliefs. And it was like a 13-page document on everything from like what you believe about the cross and like the crucifixion and resurrection to like what you believe about abortion and euthanasia. And I was like, I have to make blanket statements about this. I'm not prepared. These are such nuanced issues, and beginning to embrace that things aren't dualistic was beginning for another beginning for me, and another like wake up call where I was like, I can't do this. I can't express this. These are really complicated things. And I don't particularly land anywhere. Like when you're saying you don't care, it's kind of like I'm more open-ended. Like you said skydiving in the ocean, or not scuba diving in the ocean. Just it's expansive, and I'm not going to limit myself. There was very much a box that I was in, and anything outside the box was scary and harmful. And
there are sharks in the water.
Yeah.
Well, moving from other people's perspectives of you to just your own perspective of yourself.
Yeah.
Did you ever fear that you were either being tempted by the devil and or that you may be literally, giving yourself some kind of temporary mental comfort, but you were exchanging it for an eternity of hell? Like, did that come into the equation at all for you?
That's still like that was so a part of my childhood that I still have those thoughts. Like you've done it, you've gotten like the slippery slope, you've gotten slid all the way down, and like you could be like, I think that was just so ingrained in me from childhood. I still have thoughts like that. Like I'm wrong, but I think the thing that helps me and a lot now is it's like I don't want to be part of a system or in heaven where that's the structure. Like I don't want a God where that's the structure. If the structure is that you're either in or out, you're in this Christian club or you're not, then that's not a structure I want to be a part of anymore. I'd rather be in hell than be in heaven with that structure. Right. And I don't believe in hell anymore in that kind of way. I think we experience daily hells on earth. So yeah. That helps me when that little like thing comes into my brain of like, you're going to hell or you're wrong, and you were right before. I don't know.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Esther.
No, one of the things that just brought up for me was when people now are like, oh my gosh, they've gone, they're not Christians anymore. I'm like, well, thank God I'm not that kind of Christian. When you say the word Christian, I am glad that you're not putting me in that label, because I don't want to be that label ever again.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with Sarah in that she brought up something is true. When people are like, what do you believe in God? I'm like, what do you want? I have to ask more questions. What do you mean by God? What do you mean by Jesus? What do you mean? Like, because if you are going to label me as a Christian, or she's not a Christian, good. Because right now in the United States, the word Christian is like the word born again was. Like in the 80s, like I was in the 70s, it was good to be born again. In the 80s, it was not good to be born again. And all these words have just been so misused and so awful. That's why I say, like, Jesus is my starting point. I love Jesus. I'm not going to not say I love Jesus. And it's a little bit back to the whole Bible thing as a writer. I'm not going to throw out any book because it's people's stories. And they have a valuable story to tell, and I can learn from them. I can learn what I kind of think of, like when David's like, your word have I hid in my heart that I won't sin against you. I'm like, oh, the poor guy was like so OCD. He was just like so anxious, and he was like, this is how I can't sin. Maybe he wrote that after I don't even know if he was a real person. I don't even care if these stories are real. I care about people's lives, and I care about people's stories, whether they're saying a mythology or whether it's true, because stories are true. Stories are true. And the factual thing doesn't matter to me more about the Bible than what is the bigger overarching story that is being told. And that's why I can hold to Jesus. And I don't think he's not a historical figure. I think that's pretty important. And it's interesting to me that a bunch of people wrote about him pretty close to his life, and they got a lot similar. And the overarching thing was that he was loving and kind of upending religious and political systems.
Yeah.
And I can't not get on board with that. Like, I want to be that. That's the person I want to be. And so he's a really good example. Are there other really good examples to me? Like, I really love Aslan. The Chronicles of Narnia have been a little bit fuzzy for me, but Aslan held me as a child. The playful Aslan. And he was playful. He was different than every other god. And I loved Aslan much more than I loved Jesus.
Pardon me 1 second. We have a visitor.
You're so beautiful and radiant.
There you go.
Oh, she's being shy. Well, this is Ellie.
Hi, Ellie.
They're saying hi. You want to say hi? Give me just 10 seconds. She needs help with her show real quick. I'll be right back. Sorry about that.
Did you, just real quick, did you go to Lancaster Bible College? Is that where you went?
I did, yeah. Bob Jones for the first year, then LBC for the rest of it.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So
Even-
sorry.
Even we're not even. I was against Bob Jones always. So
Liberty.
and Bob Jones. To me, I
Sorry.
think it's so funny.
Off
Okay,
the
go ahead.
record.
It's funny with talking about Bob Jones. When I first went there, it did seem so conservative and restrictive. And it's funny when you get into it, and this is probably a good study to think about how these dynamics work. But after the first semester, where it felt like it was so hard to live there, something in my mind flipped, and switch flipped. And I would say that second semester, which was the last semester I was there before going to LBC, but I somehow switched to a point where I was ultra proud of those standards. And I thought, yes, people don't have to live this way, but if you want to be a Christian in today's society, this is the best way to do it. And I was quite proud of myself. And it really, there's a big backstory I'll tell another time as to why I kind of had to leave. But it broke my heart at that time to leave Bob Jones. And I remember when I went to LBC, I went to the dorm, and there were literally, somebody had a poster of the Beatles up on their door, and the men's dorm at LBC. And I just thought, where the hell have I just landed? Like the Beatles at a Christian school? Are you kidding me? That's how weird, I was so conservative at that point, but fortunately I did obviously move quite a bit past that, and eventually past that too. But it's interesting that the stages we all go through. Can I ask, with one of the questions that comes up a lot with these discussions is the whole idea of the Yahweh character, and painting it in the picture, not of starting with the Old Testament, but just starting with today's worship services. You walk into a worship service, he's your good father. He loves you so much. He's going to take good care of you. You can trust him. But then you actually look at the Old Testament, the Yahweh character. He's, in many of our circles that I go in, he's described as a psychopath, a God who will say, if you love me and obey me, I'll bless you. But if you don't, I will curse you. And the curses are horrible. Some of the curses are just, you'll be taken away to a foreign land. But some of them are literally, I will make you so hungry that you will have to eat your children, or be tempted to eat your own children. He says at one point, if you disobey me, I will metaphorically take you out in front of your enemies and pull up your skirt and show your nakedness to all of your enemies. This is a really bad character. And a lot of us like to say, if he were real, we wouldn't want to worship him. We're kind of glad he's not real, because he'd be a really bad God to have to fight if it were possible to fight him. But how did you deal with the whole character of God issue throughout the years of, did you, earlier in your story, did you love that character? Or did you feel like he was your good father?
I think for my childhood, this was like, you got to get behind this. Like this is God's ways are higher than your ways. And it must have been, that line alone is just the most, that I think was the most used. Like, this God's ways, we can't understand. He's using this for good, and we as humans just can't understand what that would mean. And then now you try to reconcile that with the fact that later in the New Testament it says, like, we know what good gifts we can give to our children, just as God, and they don't merge. So for me, it was you get behind this. God's ways are higher than your ways. And I just didn't talk about it. I think things made me feel uncomfortable, and then you're just told you have to accept them. And I think about how much pain, and that's such a problematic message, that like you need to accept basically an abuser, like, and then the abuse that leads fundamentalist and evangelical children into for me, it manifested in anxiety and very extreme OCD as a kid. I was very OCD. She joked with me and my brother that I was able to follow all the rules. I was able to follow the rules because I was riddled with guilt and riddled with anxiety and riddled with OCD.
Like, just constantly trying to please God.
Constantly trying to please God. We found booklets, and just like I would just draw God pictures. It's kind of disturbing when you think like a little kid is just drawing crosses on things, and like I mean,
Hmm.
but I had like booklets of like verses I had written down and like song lyrics, and I made it into my God book. And I had this God book, and then it had like a checklist of like pray 2 times and read your Bible and serve another person, say thank you. Like it had all the script of how to be the good Christian girl. And the church we were going to, which you didn't quite like, it was too conservative for you. My dad had just become born again into like evangelical Christianity from being Catholic. So that's the church we were brought to. And I mean, I still remember VBS, and like my mom would run Sunday school, and you had like the Lamb's Book of Life, and like our names were in there. And it was just like all these, I mean, the flannel graph and all the things but
Did you do the
yeah.
little bracelets with the colored beads?
Oh,
all the
Yeah.
yep.
and camp.
And we went to a camp that was from that denomination too. There was a lot of good friendships, and like really, I mean, the people there, really kind people. I wouldn't say that for me and my story, thankfully, that I never experienced any kind of like abuse from those people. Like they were
Well, mental abuse stuff.
mental mind
Spiritual-
gymnastics, like spiritual stuff, but not like
spiritual abuse.
other kinds of things. I think the problematic thing for me as a woman in those spaces was this church, like the women wore head coverings, and there's no pastor. So what happened is like we would go to Sunday school, and then the sermon part was just different men who were allowed to stand up and share what was on their hearts, but women were not. You sat in your pew, you wore head covering, and then that was the same at camp. And I even went to girls camp for a week, and even once I reached like 10 at the girls camp, I'm like in my middle school years, once you reach that age, you couldn't even be taught by a woman. Like once you reach, and that was at girls camp, so all the people sitting there were women, and it was a man who would speak to us,
Who I swear is totally gay, not out, but I
but
mean,
how could he be out in that space? I mean, so
That's a really good issue though. I mean, I'm very glad you brought that up, because the idea of how this book really demeans women. I mean, it starts from the very beginning. You look at the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. I mean, who's the primary person who's at fault? Adam was doing just fine till Eve came along in this story. And then Eve is the one that's at fault. And even says it in 1 Timothy, the reason that women should be silent is because Eve was deceived, being in the transgression. So it's like right from the start, this book blames women for the problems of the entire planet. And then when you look at the extra biblical stuff that's woven in, Enoch, the watchers, the angels, the Nephilim that fell, the issue where the women were too beautiful and the angels fell and had to have relations with women, and that's why the flood was required. It's like over and over, this book says women are such a problem for men, and therefore, good.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I don't view it as a book anymore. I view it as 66 people, and I don't even know if it was 66, because I don't even think we know that for sure, who are just trying to figure out God the same way you and I and Sarah are sitting here, and it says much more about what you believe than who God is. So that's why I guess I would say I'm still a deist, because I think everybody has the right in their own culture and in their own time frame to say what they want to say about who they think God is. The problem that I see, and this is why I do still love the Jesus is he kind of upended a lot of that. He kind of said, you heard it was said, but that's not true. Mm-hmm. You heard it was said, but it's not true. You heard this was said, but that's not true. So that's why it's just like, I guess I feel like I wouldn't throw it out any more than I would throw out what Hitler thought of God. I would be very fascinated about what Hitler thought of God. And why wouldn't I want to read that information so that I could form my own stuff? I think the problem is
that's an interesting person.
But you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying there are people who
contributed.
There are Hitler type people who wanted control, that maybe they were well-meaning. I have no idea. But all these people were just trying to figure God out. So I have a lot more space in my personal life for letting that happen. Like, I don't read it with any kind of authority. I just read much more with a curiosity. And the Jesus character is really intriguing to me, because I do think he was very progressive for his culture and his time. I mean, like, he said some that was why he was killed. And I'm not a big like I don't believe in any of the normal atonement theories. I just think he was killed because he spoke out. I mean,
Yeah.
if I was in that day and age and
People
I
are
was
still
speaking out,
killed for speaking out
people are
against systems.
right. People
every
are
day.
killed. And I just love that there's the story about that. And I guess I think like, of course the book is going to say, of course certain books are going to say, or certain people or certain whatever are going to say, that's the culture they were living in at the time. It was a tribal culture. Like I would be very interested. I mean, the whole Rwanda fiasco, I've read tons of books about Rwanda and what they think about why they got to where they were. And I'm just as fascinated about that. What was in their mindset? They obviously believed that their God was XYZ. And then I feel like it's just my job to be like, no, that's a narcissist God. That's ridiculous. You were also stuck in a system where they were being fed stuff too, the same way I have to give grace to my former self. Mm-hmm. I have to give grace to those people, whoever wrote whatever at whatever point in time, that they were just trying to figure out who God was.
Yeah, that helps me navigate like going back to the Yahweh character, is that I think like I now view the entire Old Testament, and it's like a red flag to me when people preach from the Old Testament, that it was the Israelites or whoever were the authors, it was their perspective of what they believed about God, from their cultural context. So like women were oppressed.
They were.
And they still are. And then the narratives now that people are choosing, I think, are just perpetuating some of those cycles then. Instead of viewing it through a different lens and saying, this is what these people believed about God, but now we are at this place here where we're like, this is abuse, and this is narcissism, and this is unhealthy.
We know what narcissism is.
Yeah.
And that's narcissism.
So whether these people wrote in this book that they believed this to be from God, was that really like, I don't believe that was God any more than, I don't know.
Right. And I guess I would just,
that's how I like negotiate it now, I think.
Yeah. And I guess I feel like they were under just some really terribly oppressive systems themselves. And it's just more interesting and exploratory to me. And I use this word all the time. The problem I find is what you said, Tim, earlier, is the authority, the idea of authority. It becomes prescriptive and not descriptive. And we do that all the time. That's what religion is born out of. Oh my gosh, this really worked for me. This kept me in line. This worked for me. This is what you must do. Why I say that is because I was the queen and still struggle with. This is descriptive, even in our own relationship as mother and daughter. Last week, we had a major conversation, and it's hard because you think you know what's best for your kid or whatever situation, because that's what works for you, right? Going in nature really works for me. Spending time with my flowers, going walking, writing, healthy. Oh my gosh, you should be a writer too. You should journal. You should go outside. You should sit with a flower. You should. I could have the Esther religion. In fact, it would have probably been my goal. I would have loved that. I would have been a really good leader. I could have, and I still struggle with that. Like, and I think that always coming back to it's descriptive. The Old Testament is descriptive.
Describes their experience and describes their view of God.
Right. Yeah. And not prescriptive. Even the New Testament, Jesus is in line with what I think is healthy and healing and whole. Like, I love that. I love that he upturned systems. I love that he spoke well of women. I love all the progressive ways that I love that he was like, screw that in the Old Testament. That is not right. This is how I view it. And I can get on board. And we're in a book club where we're reading Thich Nhat Hanh, You Are Here, which is a Buddhist book. Thich Nhat Hanh, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's like a weird name. Whatever. He wrote You Are Here. And and this isn't gospel to us. This is another person's perspective on how to live your life. And we're able to be like, nah, that really resonates.
That works for me. That doesn't work.
That doesn't. Yeah. So that's how I guess I can say, like, the Bible's not bad. It's just, it is just true. If that makes not true in the sense of authoritative, it's just It was whatever those people wrote was true for them.
I mean, it exists. Like, it's true that in that it exists, and like there's people that wrote that, and you can read it and think about it.
Right. And I guess I really value other authors. As an author, I am not going to dismiss any author and their writings, especially for me as a spiritual. I just love thinking about God, and I love that. I love the whole spiritual. I'm going to be a spiritual director. I love that.
Well, even though you wouldn't align with the word atheist, I could see why other Christians would definitely say you're not a Christian, or at least we suspect it, because you're definitely letting a lot of other authorities in there. Can I ask? You mentioned you've talked about the word deism, the idea that there's something out there that's love. I did just want to explore that a little bit in two ways, and I'll paint this question these two ways, and you can answer in whatever order you want to. But in terms of this God, if there is a God or a higher power, it seems like it's hiding. And I know that's a cliche. A lot of us have kind of thought through that process. But number one, do you feel like if there is some kind of higher power or consciousness, that it's hiding from us? But number two, that just the way you describe it is loving. I would challenge that in the sense that I feel like the universe is very unloving. Number one, most of the universe would destroy life. Most of it does explode and keep on destroying everything. Eventually, if the universe, what we know, if it exists long enough, it's going to, literally implode and start over again. Everything would die at that point. Even with advanced technology, whatever lives at that point is going to be gone. But even just on our Earth, you look at things like animals being ripped apart forever.
We were talking about it last night about our cat. Yeah.
And even like I don't know why this happened, but like a year or two ago, I stumbled across a video of a snake eating a frog, and I just had never seen it before. But it's like it doesn't kill the frog; it just swallows it alive. Mm-hmm. It just grabs its legs and starts chewing, and it just kind of slides down. And you look at other birds do it all the time. They'll take a mouse and just swallow it live. We think there's got to be thousands or millions of animals per day, and we're just evolved animals. Thousands or millions of animals a day that just get eaten alive or get shredded. The universe is a very dark place in that sense, and we come from that. How does it feel loving to you in that context? And again, is God, if there is a God, is he hiding?
We were just laughing because we had that conversation yesterday, because like we got a cat this year, and like we wanted to like let her go outside, because for me, I was like, don't tame her. Like that's how I felt my whole life, is like tamed. I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle, was one of my other like freedom moments, and where she says like eat the apple and let it burn, and it's that whole like Eve moment. So I was like, I gotta let my cat out. But then she's like so violent, like she just kills bunnies and like rips open songbirds, and you're just like horrified. So it's hard to reconcile. I mean, it's I don't know. We thought about like getting her a bell, things like that to prevent it. But
yeah, I guess for me, I think that's what I think everything is that perspective. Is the world from a terrible space, or like a violent space, or a loving space? Because I don't view those two things as the same. And I view them as the antithesis of one another. I don't think love and violence can coexist, which is why I don't. The whole Old Testament to me is much more just descriptive, and just people blaming God and saying God did this, told them to do this. I mean, people did that in slavery era. I mean, everybody does that. Hitler did it. Everyone does it. Everyone just uses God for their own power, and says, yeah, whatever. And I think for me, I go way down deep inside of myself. And that's where I have the ultimate authority. This is what's changed for me, is I am my own ultimate authority. And I don't really even view as God. But I would say what I find deep inside myself is love. I don't find violence. I have not found that. I'm not saying that's the case for everybody. And I would say that's because their brains aren't working properly. I'm not quite sure what I do with the whole animal thing, because I get that. I get and understand that, and that's not something I've unpacked. But I see, my perspective is I grew up in war. I have seen violence. I was not loved the way that I needed to be loved. But that I've been healed. I mean, I have healed so much healing. And I think humanity in its best state, I'm probably much more of a humanist, to be honest, that humanity in its best state, in its most healed state, is love, is loving. I don't know if animals have evolved there yet, and most of humanity isn't, but I can't explain love. The same way that other people can't explain violence, I can't explain love, and it does exist. It exists so deep inside of me, I don't even know. And so I do things that I don't know what to say. I have desires that, I mean, our son jokes like maybe it's just your neurons firing in your brain. I'm not quite sure about that. That's not something I'm personally willing to give up yet, because I have seen it work. I've seen it transform people. I've seen it change for people for the better and good and whole. And so I don't know, like the same way as we can't explain violence, I can't explain love. And all I can do is really look inside at the seat of my soul and really unpack it. And I have needs, and they're love and belonging. And that's what works for children. That's what it just seems to work. It just seems to work. And
yeah,
we're not there. I mean, I think that's the goal of like Buddhists and all the contemplative people and all that. I can't explain to all those people why they're out there just trying really hard
for love.
Like I understand. I guess I just feel like the way I explain the other is that they're just unhealed.
Yeah.
And so the more healing I get, the more loving I am. I don't know. I mean, I can't explain my transformation any other way. I just can't.
I mean, I think the Christian origin, right? The Christian message was it's the fall, and that's what all that comes from. Unpacking that now, I think there's like this tendency towards love that gives purpose. I mean, gives me purpose, gives other things purpose. That doesn't necessarily explain it in the animal kingdom, I think. And I do believe that we're all connected. So, and like even with nature, but I do also see things tending toward, in like the plant realm, like I see things tending toward growth. Like you see the weeds in the sidewalk that somehow are there, and the weeds, quote unquote, but that's life that came forth out of nothing, like out of very minimal whatever.
Everybody trying to stop it.
Everyone trying to stop it. And like my tomato plants, which recklessly grow in every corner once there's been a tomato smashed. So I mean, that helps me, that tendency toward growth and life. I do feel like I want to actively pursue like love and grow, even in like children, making with my students, like making sure that that's where I head. My husband is, he would kind of say he's agnostic. I think that's his label. He might even say he's atheist now. But he's still like, he has an adventure business, and his goal is like interconnectedness and like interpersonal growth and intrapersonal growth, even still. Yeah.
And when hell's off the table, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't make me afraid. Like I'm not afraid anymore. I don't worry about it. About hell, I guess.
Right.
Do you all think we go anywhere when we die? Or what's your best? Let me say, what's your best guess?
Yeah, I would say the only thing to me is my hope is that we would return. If we came from love, I always say this, we're held in love and we return to love. That's what I hope.
My dad says, right?
That's what he says.
Yeah.
And that's what actually calms my anxiety, calms my fears. Whether or not it's true, I don't really, and that's the other thing I've had to give up. But having the right beliefs, just doesn't matter to me anymore. Like, and whether I have the right beliefs that there is a God or there isn't a God is not that much of a priority. Well, having the correct doctrinal beliefs, like I'm an atheist it's more like, what am I being present to who I am today and now I'm really given it. I mean, I'm given whatever I have, however you want to view that, 80, 90 years. And I would much rather, I can sleep better at night if I'm moving towards growth and life and healing than I am moving towards destruction It doesn't work. And I can't explain anything other than the inside of me is love. And I even think about the whole life and death thing. That's another big contemplative thing. Things die all the time for other things. And we've even started to thank our food when, like, it's weird. My husband's such a contemplative. Like, we used to thank God. Now he's like, oh my goodness, thank you, chicken. You've given yourself as a source of life for me. And that's just, and believe it or not, I want to be buried in a biodegradable pod because my life is going to contribute to the growth of whatever comes again. Like, I'm just doing my best to do, I'm doing what I can to do whatever is good for what I know is currently in this space. Like,
Yeah.
that's
I
a very
feel open.
Buddhist mindset, I guess.
I feel very open to anything. I mean, even just yesterday, I was watching a video of someone talking about how their 2-year-old like came into this world professing that like his previous life had been a World War II pilot and like knew all this stuff that like a 2-year-old should not know. And I'm just kind of like, my Christian self, like like evangelical Christian would have been like, that's the devil. That is like witchcraft and the devil. But now I'm like, that is so cool. And my son had said something about being in the army in the past. And I was like, this is okay. Well, it's fine.
Right. Is it your imagination or is that part of what it is? It's just a constant.
Using the word don't care is hard for me because
No,
I
it's
do
not. You
care.
do
Like
care.
I am a caring person. I care about things, but I don't feel like this need to be right. And that allows me to love more, I think, than not having to have it all correct.
Right.
I'm just kind of, I guess for me, I'm very much in an exploratory phase. I'm thankful that I can just listen to people and I can just hear things and not have to moralize everything and put it in such small boxes anymore.
Right. Yeah, like it doesn't bother me if you're an atheist. That's fine. I mean, like, because I would just say, how's that work? My thing as a spiritual director would be like, what is that doing for you currently? How does it help your heart? Like, how does it help you to live the best version of who you want to be? Is this good for you? Is this right for you? Is this necessary? Because it could be a necessary part of it's all okay. And it's all just part of the process.
And everyone's process is
and see, for me, the hiding thing.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to come back to that. When you said he's hiding, I don't see that. It's not my perspective. I feel like God is everywhere. I can't, and maybe it's a contemplative husband or the fact that I see him in the bee that's floating. Like, I can't get around the fact that I stopped at a flower and this bee was just going at it with the flower. And I was so happy inside. Like, to me, that's God. Like, I see God everywhere. To me, it's the opposite of hiding. He's screaming. He's absolutely screaming constantly. Like, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. He, she, they, love, whatever is constantly screaming in my world. Like, I don't know if it's that I have eyes to see. I don't know if it's my general personality. I have no idea. But the God of the Bible was hiding. And also, if he is a little bit hiding, to me, that's just mystery. How cool is that? I don't even mind. Like, that's just more for me to explore. That's like hide and seek. Oh, it's not like he's hiding and he's mean about it, or she or whatever. It's like, we're playing hide and seek. Like, come over here, see what more I have, see what more I have, see what's under here, see what's behind the rock, see what, I don't know. So I just am so curious, and I can't get around it. It's like the same way as you would feel like you can't believe there's a God, I can't believe there's not, because it's just, I don't know. That's how I feel. And it has been perpetuated ridiculously amount of times by my husband in our family, in our marriage. It's probably like we get pennies from God. Like, there's pennies everywhere. You're just looking for them, and in the parking space. And so it's always finding what's good in the world and what's meaningful. And I don't know. So
can I ask on that? No, just I gotta ask, do you think some of that is our privilege in where we stand in the world? Because I mean, if you grew up in a spot where, there's not a lick of food 3 or 4 days of the week, you're starving, there's no clean water, there's
no, because I grew up in war. I grew
But
up in war. I did not grow up like this. I
right.
did not grow up with any privilege. I grew up in poverty. My parents were white. Okay, so there was some privilege there. I grew up in war. There was a war going on. I saw violence. There was gunfire. People were being murdered. My parents' friends were murdered. It was awful. I mean, I grew up with constant poverty. Like it was everybody all around me. And so, no, do I have privilege now? 100%. But I can't explain all of the people that I've had contact with all through my life who were absolutely not an okay, and they cling to God and see goodness all around them. In my worst pain, when I had a nervous breakdown and couldn't leave my closet, it was zero question for me that God would met me in the middle of all that, and I was able to see like the radiologist that was helping me. I don't know. I don't know, because 100%, is it harder? 100%, but that's where I get a little bit like defensive, because I'm like, no, I personally don't have the white American Christian easy story. I don't.
It is.
And it's fascinating. And yet there was like people in absolute poverty are the people that can see God the most. It's like so bizarre to me. It's a bizarre, he's shouting all over, and that for some weird reason, it's the human spirit. I don't know what it is. I don't know why the slaves I don't know how they were being beaten by day and singing weird songs about heaven. And God bless them for thinking there was a heaven. Good for them for thinking there was something better than this for them, that they deserved something better. And they wrote songs about it. Good for them. Like, that's where I'm like, what explains that?
It's weird though. It's how our minds change, because I would have agreed with you years ago. I would see the story of slaves begging for a heaven in their minds as evidence that there is no God. And it's funny. I don't see God anywhere. I love life more than ever. Life has definitely become more beautiful to me, but it's just weird. It's just, just saying it as not as to be antagonistic, but just as an observation. It's so interesting how we, in different seasons of life. And I look at my beautiful children, I look at the beauty of nature, and just so many beautiful things in my life. And life truly has become exponentially more beautiful since I become an atheist. But I don't see God anywhere, like anywhere.
It depends on what you mean by God, I guess. What do you mean by God when you say that? Sorry, I'm turning into my podcast host self.
Yeah, some kind of guiding force that maybe started everything, and certainly is the place to which we would look for wisdom and guidance, and who has some kind of sovereign plan in mind, and who is some kind of he's the artistic creator who's orchestrating the universe. Maybe for some people our particular lives, but at least he's orchestrating history in some way. And to me, I don't see any evidence of design. I see nonstop evidence of complete chaos. Some of it's beautiful, but it's still chaotic, and it I don't see any designer behind any of it. But I know we're short on time, so I wanted to keep moving. Did you have any other things, Sarah, you wanted to add to that discussion? I know Esther and I took that one away.
Yeah, no, I guess for me, like, I don't know if I define God that way anymore. Like, I think, I wouldn't necessarily say the God that I need for me doesn't need to be orchestrating everything. It does, like that. I don't need that as part of my definition of God anymore. I'm not actively, like, I guess I've definitely removed myself from like Christian spaces where like God is defined certain ways. Like, I'm not attending church. I'm not I can't really listen to worship songs anymore. Because they're just, messaging is just funny, and it just feels like, it feels weird. So I don't know if I'm not even really actively thinking of things as God. I guess I'm participating more in like things are spiritual in nature.
Like indigenous more,
like more just spiritual and like, I don't know, connected.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. There definitely does seem to be, it's like to me, it's like a facade, but it's worth exploring, because you do hear stories and you do see things that just seem like a whether it's as simple as a deja vu, or hear these stories of twins that move to other sides of the country. One of them has a car accident and the other one immediately feels pain.
Oh, yes,
There's a lot of weird stuff in it. There's a mystery to life for sure. But I think to me, it's been beautiful because when you look at the God character, there's in some sense this idea of he started it, she started it, but there's completion, and the way that you get fulfilled in life is by moving back toward that character, and to realize that there's no movement that needs, like, I don't need to move toward that God is not moving or needs to move toward me. That's just a complete irrelevance. And to me, the idea of saying, you're free of mental shackles that past generations couldn't have even imagined. The freedom from those shackles to me is the beauty of life. At least at this point. I hope it gets a lot more beautiful, in the future. But can I ask with these ideas that we're talking about, and in the light of your background, do you feel like there's some sense in which people who continue to push those old narratives that you left, even though couldn't call yourself an atheist, but those old narratives, do you feel like there's any sense in which they are psychological manipulations and abuses to children? Like when you tell children these things?
100%.
Yes.
That's why you don't really have any kind of agenda for your son.
Yeah, like I don't read the Bible to my child.
Oh, really?
No. And he went to church until 2, and then COVID hit. And that's when things, majorly fell apart for me. That's when I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. That's when my church started pushing this, like, you need to tell us in 13 pages, like, what you believe. And I was like, we're done with this. I think then my husband felt the freedom to be like, yeah, I don't think I ever actually believed any of this. Like, I don't know. He's on his own journey, and thankfully I'm fine with whatever he's doing. For the most part, I actually am fearful because we live in central PA. That's a pretty, like, there's churches on every street corner. You have there's a really big evangelical church in our community. And so I'm so nervous that people are going to invite him to youth group. Like when he gets older, he's only 5 now, but I'm like, oh no, he's going to be the unsaved kid that people are going to try, like, that I would have been I pinned one of my friends down on the playground and converted her. And that's going to happen to him. So I don't do that. I sometimes pray with him. Like I will, at bedtime, I just want him to feel like there's some kind of, I guess for me, there's some kind of force that he's safe. I just talk about things I'm grateful for in the prayer, and just pray love over him, may your night be full of love, may you feel love inside, those kinds of things. Whether you call it a prayer or a mantra or a blessing,
or a wish.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I'm not sure.
Speaking something into the universe.
So that's where I feel like I'm kind of fuzzy. That's where I can definitely see why people would say you're not a Christian, and I'm getting very worried friends messaging me. But
how do you deal with those people when they try so hard, and especially when they're ultra judgmental?
I've written back and forth with people. We've had Zoom conversations with people. But I guess, and it's nice for that. It's nice of them, because if you really believe in Christianity, you should be doing this to every person. If you really think the whole world is going to hell, then yes, you better be out there. So in some ways it seems like I have to take it as a very loving thing. They do not want to see me there, and they care about me that much. I have people who haven't even talked to in years and care about me that much. That's really great. But I'm not afraid for them, so it doesn't matter. I can go say my whole piece, and then it doesn't, whether I change them or not, it doesn't matter, and I'm not worried for myself.
Right.
So,
and even for your own brain, for me, I just go wow, they're so afraid. It's okay. They're all caught up in fear, and I just have to say, I'm not. And we did say this to the one guy. We're not responsible for the fact that you're afraid for us. Sorry. Yeah. I know you're really afraid, because it's just so trying to aren't you afraid? We're no. We're not afraid. Sorry. You want us to be afraid, and I get that. You're afraid, and you're allowed to be afraid. but I'm not really going to believe things.
Yeah, I really hold to still just like what God to me is just like changing oppressive systems and like ending. I mean, for me, I think the whole women thing has been like I would never have believed I would be like a feminist. Like that would have just been, I don't know. Just being able to work toward that
Yeah,
feels like
feminism used to be a bad word.
yes, and it feels like, but that stuff feels spiritual to me, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I know we're almost out of time. I want to ask you a quick, quirky question. And then, Esther, I wanted to give you 30 seconds to just plug your Deconstructing Mamas podcast and anything else that you all are working on. But my quirky question for you all is this. If you all could look ahead 10 years from now, and the 10-year from now person is an absolute and complete atheist, what would you think if that theoretical future person was real? If you saw that happening, what would you think? What would your response be? And I mean a real like
Yeah.
naturalist atheist. Like there's nothing. You're basically a nihilist. There's never been a purpose for life, a real purpose. You make purpose, but there's no real purpose. There's no real morality. If that person was your future, what would you think of it?
Currently,
Yeah.
and I'm supposed to be really honest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, would that be the
You
freak
want to
you
say
out?
what?
Would you be like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, I can never do that?
I don't know.
No.
I mean, I would hope I would be like happy with that. I guess the fear for me is like I don't know if I could be happy feeling that way, like that there's no purpose. And I could totally see that I cling to this just for my own like need of purpose and like need of happiness. Like I can definitely understand, and I could see myself looking back as an atheist and be like, she just clung to that because that's what she needed at that time. But I do need that, and I am not ready to leave that. Um, yeah, it feels like hopeless to me. So it'd be interesting. I want to go on and like listen to some of your other atheists and hear like how they experience the world and how they navigate like hope, and putting like good things into the world, because my spirituality or whatever remains of my Christianity in me does, I think, give me that, like give me some hope and give me some like reason to put good things out there. I don't know.
And that's
So my current self would be really sad for that future self right now where I am, because I love my life. I love my what I'm doing. I love hope. I mean, hope is probably my greatest mantra and what gets me by. So I kind of feel similar to you. If I understand, but I have always said, how is this hurting me? If it was, and it could still be hurting me and I would just be oblivious. But I have a wonderful relationship with my spouse, my partner. I have fantastic relationships with my kids. I feel very full of purpose, and I feel like I've gotten so much healing. And so I would want to ask that person, I would really love to know their journey. I get very excited because I view my 75-year-old self, my 65, 55, I view all of ourselves as going, like holding hands and going together on a journey. And so, yeah, I actually write letters to my future self. I have a letter in my, I'm a writer, so I have a letter in my inbox. I mean, in my thing that says that I'm supposed to open 4 years from now, that I wrote myself 6 years ago. I did this with 4 friends too, and it'll be very interesting and telling.
You wrote it 6 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So I don't know.
That's a good idea.
Very
I like
interesting and telling, but I just kind of feel like that person is probably going to be okay. But my current self is like, but my self from 10 years ago might be sad about who I am now. So I know I'd be like, I definitely,
yeah, that's how I feel.
That's why I kind of am like, that person will be okay. I just, my current self, where I am right now, would be sad because I don't know if I'm the same as Sarah. I'm not really ready. I feel like I keep saying I don't care, but I guess I've just gotten to the place that whether I don't, even have to believe that in theism or atheism. Does that make sense? Like I have a groundedness that's deeper than all of that, based in love, I guess.
Yeah, and I could see how myself 5 years ago would like be appalled at myself now.
Yeah.
So I can only like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can only imagine. So yeah,
I would
that's
not be
what keeps
appalled.
me from being like,
Thankfully, I don't think I would be appalled or judgmental. I'm not judgmental or appalled.
yeah.
I'm more curious.
Yeah.
And currently right now I think that for them because I'm so happy. I mean, is my life happy all the time? No, I've lots of crap. I mean, this has been a really rough couple of weeks, and I mean, I suffer just like along with everybody, internally, externally. Like life is hard, right? And life can be beautiful, but it can be both, and so it can be all of it. And
I just feel like I'm happy that I can sit here and listen to your perspective and or just like know where you're at and know that like you're experiencing more beauty than you did, because clearly like Christianity and what you were was like keeping you from that.
Trauma.
And I'm just so glad I don't have to shed that anymore for that.
Yeah, me too.
It's interesting too. I'm sorry, I got Esther.
No, I'm sorry, me too. Like it's interesting to be able to have conversations where everybody can be different, and I don't have this big agenda for you to be where I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
It's interesting. Just a quick anecdote, and I'll wrap up here. I had a friend that I went to a school called the Christian Academy. We grew up together, and from the youngest days, both our parents were teachers. We both did Bible quizzing for years, memorized thousands of verses together. And I found out through the grapevine that, like 15 years ago, found out she had become an atheist. Just someone else told me, and I reached out to her to, email, and I was like, just curious, what happened. And it's, by the way, I've got an interview of her. Her name is Susan. She did an interview. I'll send you the link. But I was like, what happened? I was still a total fundamentalist Christian, and she kind of tried to explain it. And I was just like at a loss for words. Like, I don't know what to say to you. You're clearly like a lost soul to me. And I wish you the best. And like, literally, fortunately, I left it on a good term, good tone, so to speak. 10 years later, I emailed her back and I said, I just literally just picked up the same email chain. I said, hey, Susan, guess what? I'm right there with you. And it's interesting how the seasons change. Well, I know we're out of time, but Esther, could you just take 30 seconds and kind of plug your podcast and anything else that you all are doing?
Sure. I'm all over the place, but I'll just plug my two more faithy things or whatever, non-faith is I'm the co-host of the Deconstructing Mamas podcast with Liz Enns-Petters. I know she's been on your channel before, so I think that people are familiar with her. We do unpack our faith journeys and other people's, but we're just trying to lean into what brings people help and hope and a little bit of humor. Liz especially is kind of funny, and so
awesome.
we just are doing that, and people are allowed to be wherever they are. That's just whatever, and we're open to learning whatever works for people to have less suffering in this life and more healing. And especially unpacking how the trauma of toxic faith systems. And also we're deconstructing mamas. How do we work this out now in parenting? Because what are we doing? We were all raised a certain way, and we're absolutely at a loss of how to do it differently. So that's where we are. And then I do, as a spiritual director, as my author, I am Esther the Dalai Mama. Sarah gave me that name. And I'm just constantly unpacking my ever-evolving journey of faith. And I literally will read things from 3 years ago and like, oh, I can't put that out there again. Oh, that meme is like horrible. Oh, so it just shows how we're constantly changing and evolving and growing. And I just want to keep going there. And so I have a lot of people that follow me, unfollow me, because they just don't know what to do with me. Like I said from the beginning, because I'm just not being put in any box. I'm trying not to put God in any box. It's just like, this is what I know right now. It could change.
I was going to say,
to the ride.
You all should consider, I don't know if this is already something you do or are thinking about, but you all should consider doing like a mother-daughter YouTube channel. There's another family that I am aware of where I've interviewed them too, but where the mom fully deconverted, was afraid to tell her daughter because her daughter was still a Christian. Her daughter eventually deconverted, and they eventually, actually talked through it and like, yeah, we're both actually atheists. And now they do a mother-daughter podcast on YouTube together. Just talk. You all are great. You all are hysterical, and I can tell you all have a lot of humor in your relationship. So I'd love to see what evolves from your great conversations.
Well, it's mostly like shaking our head, like, can you believe this?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, I'm not really found anywhere. I used to have a blog and I mean, I'm so caught up with my teaching and I do like our farmstead blog kind of thing, or Instagram, but I occasionally write. I'm just like Sarah Meassick or something, but I'm not following. She's the one to follow.
But
Gotcha.
Sarah's really great. I mean, I've learned more from her probably than 95% of the people in my life. So anything I say is probably secretly been told to me through her. So.
That's awesome. Well, I know you got to go, so I'll just wrap up here by saying, everyone, we've been speaking with Esther Goetz and Sarah Meassick. Thank you all so much. You're the dynamic duo. I really appreciate you telling your story today.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Bye.